Hello everybody, hope everyone's doing good. In today's session 5, which is a continuation of the earlier session 3 and session 4. In session 3 and session 4, we have discussed what are the safety precautions while handling materials and also while handling compressed gas cylinders. So in today's session 5, we will see what are the safety precautions that has to be taken care when handling corrosive and waste containers and drums. So as can be seen in the sketch, corrosive when falls onto a material, it corrodes or it corrodes away the material. The same if it falls on us, on human beings, it causes destruction of tissues through chemical action at the point of contact, and this should be avoided at any cost. So when we say corrosive chemicals, it can be in the form of liquid, solids or gases, and it can affect the skin, eyes and respiratory tracts. And some of the example of corrosive chemicals include liquids such as acids, bases, bromine, hydrogen, and if we come to the gases such as chlorine, ammonia, and in case of solids we have phosphorus and phenol. So these are the different types of chemicals, whether it is liquid form or gaseous form or solids, which are used in industries. So a great care has to be taken care how to use such chemicals without injuring ourselves. So let us see what are the some of the chemical hazards or the effect of chemicals it has. So most of the chemicals are reactive. That means it reacts with something. Even it may react with the atmosphere, or it may react with some other chemical when it comes in contact with it. And of course there are toxin or they are toxic in nature. If we inhale in a large quantity, or if we come in physical contact with them, it will be harmful to us. Of course they are corrosive in nature and they are flammable. That means it may catch fire easily. So these are some of the chemical hazards of chemicals. Let us see what are the safety precautions that has to be taken care when handling such materials. The first thing is that whenever we get any chemical substance, the manufacturer of that chemical substance will provide us the material safety data sheets, what we call it MSDS, which we have discussed in module 2. All the manufacturer provide this MSDS. So what does this MSDS contain? This MSDS contain the various characteristics of that particular chemical that we are handling. It states the properties of that chemical, the hazardous nature, the working environment it should be, or the temperature, or in case if there's a spillage or if there's a contact with such chemical, what has to be done. All this will be provided in the MSDS. So once we obtain that MSDS, we'll have a idea what type of material that we're going to handle, and we can plan according to that. Next safety precaution, be aware of all the hazards of the material that we work with. Means we should be knowing what are chances of catching fire, explosion, or what are the health effect it has on us, or what is the chemical reactivity of such chemicals. We should also be knowing which of the materials we work are corrosive in nature. It's not like all chemicals are corrosive, so we should be having a good idea which chemicals are very corrosive in nature. Next point, corrosives should be stored in suitable labeled containers away from incompatible materials in a cool, dry area. So whatever the corrosives are there in a containers, they should be labeled properly, stating in the label should provide information regarding the type of chemical, the hazardous nature of that chemical, and so on. And it should be stored away from incompatible materials. So here incompatible materials means incompatible materials are such materials which may cause fire or explosion or some chemical reaction with the chemicals that are already stored in the containers. So they should be properly separated, the incompatible materials. And of course, the corrosive container should be stored in a cool and dry area. Store, handle, and use corrosives in well ventilated areas. Very important. So whenever these containers containing chemicals are stored, there should be proper ventilation. Well, they should be well designed and well maintained ventilation system, so that if there are any chances of spillage and if there are any chances of corrosive vapors or fumes or mist or airborne dust, uh, they should be properly moved out. The amount and type of ventilation of course depends upon the type of kind of job and the kind and the amount of materials used and also the type of chemicals that are being used. And whatever the ducts or the ventilation systems are there, they should be corrosive resistant. They should not react with the corrosive material. Next, inspect containers for damage or leaks before handling. Never use containers that appear to be swollen. Very important. If there are physical, we should inspect these containers for damage or leaks. And if the containers that appears to be swollen, it should never be. We should never handle such containers. It's very important. Handle containers safely to avoid damaging them. As much as possible, try to move the containers by using mechanical means, and they should be not be unnecessary handling of containers should be avoided. That means every now and then the container should not be moved from place to place. Next, dispense corrosives carefully and keep containers closed when not in use. So dispense corrosives means suppose if a container having corrosive material has to be transferred to a smaller container, so this transferring of the corrosive material from a larger container to a smaller container should be done by using usually a pump which is non-corrosive in nature, or it should never by a bulb pipette. We should never pipette a chemical by using our mouth. We should always use a bulb pipette, and containers should always be closed when not in use. So next point, stir corrosives slowly and carefully in cold water when job requires mixing corrosives and water. So sometimes corrosives has to be mixed with water, and this mixing is usually done with cold water. And here when mixing water with corrosive, they usually done water is slowly poured and then mixing will be done. If the water is poured fully or suddenly, the chance it will start boiling. The chemicals will start boiling, resulting in vapors, fumes, or even spillage. So this has to be avoided. Handle and dispose of corrosive waste safely. Once a corrosive and if there is once the container becomes empty which had corrosive in it, those drums or containers should be disposed of carefully or safely. Should be laying around. Every other manufacturers provides how it has to be disposed of for all chemicals. We should practice good housekeeping, personal cleanliness, and equipment maintenance. So when we say maintain cleanliness at all time in the workplace, it means we should clean up any spills and buildups of corrosives promptly and safely. We should properly dispose of unlabeled or contaminated chemicals. We should remove empty containers at once from work areas. And we should ensure that all containers for waste are properly marked and easily located. And coming to personal cleanliness, we should wash our hands before eating, drinking, or smoking, or going to the toilet. And we should remove and clean the contaminated clothing before wearing it again. We should not smoke, drink, or chew gum, or eat in any areas where hazardous chemicals are present. And we should avoid touching ourselves with contaminated hands. And we should clean ourselves thoroughly at the end of the work day. That's regarding personal maintenance. And even coming to the regular maintenance of equipment, we should see that whichever the equipments that are used for maintenance are properly cleaned once cleaning has been done. That means, and it should also be corrosive resistance in nature. Coming to the next point, we should wear proper personal protective equipment for each of the jobs that we do. Again, the type of PP or personal protective equipment that we wear for the job depends upon the type of chemical that is being handled. It's always advisable to wear goggles. I mean, that too chemical resistant goggles. So if any fumes or any dust particles are there, to protect ourselves, gloves should be wear all the times. Proper shoes and even the clothing should be proper. And also next point, we should be knowing how to handle emergencies. That means in case when handling the chemicals, if there is a fire or spillage, or if we get personal injured, we should know how to handle such things. We should know the first aids or the emergency things that has to be done in such conditions. And we should follow the health and safety rules that apply to our jobs. That means follow the safety guidelines or rules and regulations whenever we're doing a job. If by chance our eyes or skin get contaminated with chemicals, we should wash with water at least 20 to 30 minutes, even sometimes longer in case of accidental contact. And even still, if it is not useful, washing is not useful, then we should immediately contact the doctors, or we should call immediately for medical assistance. And we should also be knowing where is the closest eye wash station, and also the safety showers where they are located and how to use them. Which that means if by accidentally we get contact with come in physical contact with the chemicals, we should not be running here and then looking for the eye wash station or sort of safety showers. We should be knowing which is where it is, which is the nearest eye wash station or safety stations and showers, and we should of course should know how to use them. Never return unused materials to the original container. That means once a chemical has been taken out of the container, it should not be returned back, because there are chances that it may be contaminated and it may cause a chemical reaction. Lastly, we should not reuse empty containers. We should never reuse any empty chemical containers, because there are chances that there will be some residues always be present in those containers. So empty containers should be properly disposed of as specified by the manufacturer. Next topic, safety while handling waste drums and containers. So in this topic, before seeing what are various steps how to handle waste drums and containers, it should be inspected. There should be appropriate procedures or rules or standards that should be followed when inspecting or handling drums. So before handling any drums, they should be visually inspected, and so as to gain as much information as possible about their content. The inspection crew should look for symbols, words, or other marks on the drum indicating its contents are hazardous, whether it is radioactive or explosive nature or corrosive or toxic or inflammable. See, now this information is available if they look to the labels that will be pasted on this container. And they should also look for symbols, words, or any marks which says what is the content of that, what actually that container has in it, whether it is any discarded laboratory chemicals or reagents or other potential dangerous materials. They should also look into the deterioration, whether the container is deteriorating or not, in terms of whether it is corrosive, whether it is corroded, if any rusts are there or any leaks are there in the container. And they should also look into drum, whether any signs, if with any swellings are there or any bulging of the drums is there. So all this will be done by the inspection team before handling the drums. So the main purpose of handling the drum is to make sure that they can respond to any problems that might impair, that may put into danger the worker's safety, such as radioactivity, leakage, or the presence of explosive substances. So, one more purpose of handling is to unstack and orient drums for sampling, and if necessary, to organize drums into different areas on site. So, this is the main purpose of handling drums. And we know that accidents occur frequently during handling, particularly during initial handling, that is during initial transportation. And we should always make sure that drum should be only handled if necessary. If the drum has to be moved from one place and then only it has to be moved. Unnecessary movement of or handling of drum should be avoided. And whoever is handling such drums, the workers should be warned about the hazardous of handling such drums and instructed to minimize handling as much as possible. Next, dispense corrosives carefully and keep containers closed when not in use. So dispense corrosives means, suppose if a container having corrosive material has to be transferred to a smaller container, so this transferring of the corrosive material from a larger container to a smaller container should be done by using usually a pump which is non-corrosive in nature, or it should never by a bulb pipette. We should never pipette a chemical by using our mouth. We should always use a bulb pipette. And containers should always be closed when not in use. So next point, stir corrosives slowly and carefully in cold water when job requires mixing corrosives and water. So sometimes corrosives has to be mixed with water, and this mixing is usually done with cold water. And here when mixing water with corrosive, they usually done water is slowly poured and then mixing will be done. If the water is poured fully or suddenly, the chance it will start boiling. The chemicals will start boiling, resulting in vapors, fumes, or even spillage. So this has to be avoided. Handle and dispose of corrosive waste safely. Once a corrosive and if there is once the container becomes empty which had corrosive in it, those drums or containers should be disposed of carefully or safely. Should be laying around. Every other manufacturers provides how it has to be disposed of for all chemicals. We should practice good housekeeping, personal cleanliness, and equipment maintenance. So when we say maintain cleanliness at all time in the workplace, it means we should clean up any spills and buildups of corrosives promptly and safely. We should properly dispose of unlabeled or contaminated chemicals. We should remove empty containers at once from work area. And we should take extreme caution in handling drums that are not intact or which are not tightly sealed. And we should ensure that the operator have a clear view of the roadway when carrying drums. That means his view should not be obstructed, whether he is carrying manually or through mechanical vehicles. And if necessary, ground workers, that means some other workers may guide the operator's motion if needed. And the workers should be told that the drums and containers are not step ladders. That means the employees should not be allowed to stand on or work of the drums or containers. Next point. When handling shock sensitive waste, all non-essential employees must be evacuated from the potential impact area. So there are certain ways. If the container falls to the ground, then it may result in shock waves and some chemical reaction may take place, and this may result in explosive or catching of fire. Therefore, in such cases, workers who are not needed for handling of drums should be evacuated from the potential impact area. Next point, employees not actually involved in the opening of the drum or container must be kept at a safe distance. That means unnecessary workers should not be near the container or drums which contains corrosive. or when it is being used. So next point, when there is a reasonable probability of a flammable atmosphere being present or developing on site, all equipment and tools must be of a type to prevent source of ignition. So wherever there is a probability or chances that uh, this particular chemical may cause fire or it on site, then we should make sure that whatever the equipments and tools that are being used during that time should be not be a source of ignition. Should not be a source of ignition. The equipments and the tools should be such that it tries to prevent the source of ignitions. Next, let's see what is the procedure during drum storing of such drums. The first point is all containers used to store hazardous waste must be clearly labeled with the words hazardous waste. So a non-worker or a non-employee of that company, if we come across a container, he should be knowing that this is hazardous. So proper labeling should be done, and whatever the labeling is done, it should be eligible or legible, we can say, so that it can be properly read and understood, and any old or damaged labels should be removed. Next, the containers used to store hazardous material should be in good condition. That means the container should not have any dents or holes, rust, or a structure damaged. It should be proper, in good condition. Next, unless transfer is occurring, drums and other containers must be kept closed at all time. Next point, keep containers properly closed by making sure drum rings are closed properly and all caps are in place and tightened. All hazardous material must be placed inside the storage container. It should not be lying in the open where it may cause damage. It should be properly placed inside the storage container. If waste is spilled onto the top or the sides of container, it must be cleaned up immediately. If by accidentally, if the waste gets spilled maybe on the tops or the sides of the container, it must be cleaned up immediately. That's the work of the housekeeping. Containers with hazardous waste residues on the outside are not accepted and rejected. While suppose if the containers which contain hazardous waste, and if the residue of that hazardous waste is on the outside of the container, maybe on the top or the sides, it should not be accepted and should be rejected immediately, because handling of such containers will harm the worker. Hazardous waste is compatible with the container into which it is being placed. Very important. So whatever the hazardous waste that we are placing in the container, it should not those hazardous waste should not react with the container. The container that are being used should be non-reactive. That is what this says. If a storage area contains ignitable or reactive waste, no smoking sign must be posted, and it should be posted such that it is visible to all. It should be written in big bold capital letters. Next point, a hazardous waste container storage area must have adequate walkway space. So wherever these hazardous waste containers are being stored, the storage, there should be enough space for the proper movement of the vehicle, for loading and unloading, and even for the personal, for the movement of the person. The view should be unobstructed. It should be spacious in nature. The storage area should be spacious in nature. So as can be seen in the sketch, corrosive, when falls onto a material, it corrodes or it corrodes away the material. The same if it falls on us, on human beings, it causes destruction of tissues through chemical action at the point of contact, and this should be avoided at any cost. So when we say corrosive chemicals, it can be in the form of liquid, solids, or gases, and it can affect the skin, eyes, and respiratory tracts. And some of the example of corrosive chemicals include liquids such as acids, bases, bromine, hydrogen, and if we come to the gases such as chlorine, ammonia, and in case of solids we have phosphorus and phenol. So these are the different types of chemicals, whether it is liquid form or gaseous form or solids, which are used in industries. So a great care has to be taken care how to use such chemicals without injuring ourselves.